The chandeliers glittered above the vast hall, their light bouncing off marble pillars as if trying to mask the heaviness in the air. Guests whispered in hushed tones, dressed in black silk and tailored suits, waiting for the memorial of Grace Whitfield to begin. Cameras clicked at the edges of the crowd, reporters eager to catch a headline from the most powerful man in the city, Noah Whitfield, the billionaire whose empire stretched across continents, stood at the center of it all with an expression carved from stone. His wife had died 8 months earlier during childbirth, leaving him with a daughter he scarcely knew how to hold, let alone raise. He had arranged this evening like one would arrange a museum exhibit, polished, flawless, and untouchable. To Noah, this memorial was not only for Grace, but a performance of control, a statement that grief could be dressed in marble and gold. Then it happened. The sound that would fracture his perfect facade. From the side of the hall, a soft cry rose, not loud but piercing enough to cut through the silence. All heads turned. Lily, the daughter Grace had left behind, stirred uneasily in the arms of Evan, the household maid, but she was not cradled in the way many expected. She was nestled tightly against Evan's chest, wrapped in a fabric sling that held her close to the rhythm of his heartbeat. Gasps flickered across the hall. A billionaire's heir, strapped to the chest of a servant. During the memorial of her mother it was, to the eyes of many, unthinkable. Whispers sharpened into judgment. How inappropriate, disgraceful, a spectacle at such a solemn moment. Noah's face darkened, his jaw tightened, and suddenly his voice thundered across the chamber. Don't humiliate her memory like this. His words echoed, raw and violent, bouncing off the polished walls. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously. Guests shrank back, some shocked, others secretly thrilled by the scandal unfolding before their eyes. Evan froze, but his grip on Lily remained steady. He knew better than to release her to panic. Years spent working in the NICU had taught him that Lily's small body needed this closeness. Born fragile, prone to reflux, her stomach often rejected the milk she drank. Without the gentle incline of the sling, she risked choking, her airways closing before anyone could react. Evan did not wear the sling as a statement, but as a lifeline. Still, under Noah's searing glare, his role as protector turned into something else entirely, an accused man on trial before an unforgiving audience. Noah strode forward, grief twisting into fury. To him, the sling looked like indulgence, weakness disguised as care. He had grown up under rules of strength and posture, of straight backs and hard lessons. A baby, he believed, must be taught early not to cling. And so he went in front of the crowd. He reached for his daughter with hands that shook from suppressed anger. The flash of cameras illuminated the strain on his face as he pulled Lily away, holding her upright like a soldier at attention. The room held its breath. Guests stared, waiting for the billionaire to restore his control. But the child's body betrayed him. Lily convulsed suddenly, her tiny frame arching as milk erupted from her mouth. It spilled down Noah's immaculate suit. But worse, her face reddened, her breath caught, and her cry turned into a strangled gasp. In the seconds that followed, time fractured. Whispers became shrieks. Reporters dropped their pens, and the polished image of Noah Whitfield, master of empires, orchestrator of perfection, was replaced by the fragile terror of a father holding a child whose life slipped through his hands. The memorial that was meant to honor Grace now teetered on the edge of disaster. And in that charged silence, the fate of the tiny girl, the father who did not understand her, and the man who carried her heart against his own chest hung in the balance. Because sometimes the truest love does not come dressed in marble halls or gilded chandeliers. It arrives in the quiet rhythm of a heartbeat, in the arms of someone who chooses care over spectacle. If this story has already gripped you, stay with Heart's story. Here, every tale reminds us that perfection means nothing without compassion, and that even the most powerful lives can break open under the weight of love. Subscribe and share if you believe that no memorial, no ritual, and no fortune can outshine the simple act of protecting a child. The hush that had fallen over the memorial turned brittle, every gaze fixed on the fragile child in Noah Whitfield's arms. Lily's cheeks flushed crimson, her tiny body trembling as she struggled to breathe after the sudden eruption of milk. Panic rippled across the audience, yet it was coded in judgment rather than action. The guests, draped in black velvet and pearls, shifted uncomfortably, but did nothing. Their whispers sharpened, weaving through the air like blades. "This is unbecoming." Someone hissed, "Such chaos," in a tribute to Grace. Another muttered, "He should have hired a proper nurse. Why rely on that man?" Heads turned toward Evan, his presence now a scandal more than a service. Evan did not flinch. The sling still hung across his chest, empty now, swaying as if mourning the sudden absence of the child it had cradled. His hands hovered near, poised with instinct born from years in neonatal intensive care. He could see the danger written in Lily's contorted face. The milk not only spilled, it threatened her fragile airway. She needed help, immediate, precise, life-saving help. Yet Noah's grip was iron, his belief in rigid posture outweighing the quiet truth Evan carried in his bones. Noah's voice tore through the hall once more. "This is a place of reverence, not a theater for your strange methods." His words were directed at Evan, but his audience was the room, the press, the ghosts of expectation. His arms locked around Lily's stiff form, trying to prove that authority could tame fragility. The child's body rebelled. Her cry broke into jagged gasps. Her fists clutched desperately at Noah's suit, as though begging for the comfort that had been stripped away. In the crowd, a woman covered her mouth, her pearls rattling against her fingers as she whispered, "She cannot breathe." Another guest clutched the arm of his chair, torn between stepping forward and remaining seated. No one moved. The fear of overstepping the will of a billionaire froze every instinct toward compassion. Then came the sound that shattered the illusion of control, Lily's choking sob, sharp and high, a noise that cut deeper than Noah's thunder. It echoed off the marble walls, louder than the organ playing softly in the background. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, their eyes wide with horror. What began as murmurs of disapproval shifted into something heavier fear. Evan's body surged forward before thought could catch him. His voice carried, clear and urgent. "She will suffocate if you keep her like that." The words struck through the weight of ceremony like a scalpel through skin. But Noah bristled, rage colliding with pride. To release his daughter into the arms of a servant, a man dressed plainly among silks, would be to admit weakness before the world. He clung tighter, even as Lily's face deepened in color, even as her breaths became shorter. The hall grew restless. Guests fidgeted in their seats, glancing at each other, but no one dared confront Noah directly. The judgment that once fell on Evan began to waver. Unease etched itself into the polished faces of the powerful, the realization dawning that the sling they had ridiculed might have been more than cloth, it might have been survival. But Noah was deaf to their silence. He barked again, voice cracking with strain. "Holding her constantly will break her spine. Make her soft. She must learn to be strong." His words collided with reality in the most brutal way. Lily jerked in his arms, milk bubbling at her lips, her tiny chest heaving violently. The sound of her desperate gasp silenced even the whispers. In that instant, the drama of wealth, image, and pride collapsed into a single truth: a child was in danger, and the man gripping her was blinded by grief and fear. Evan stood at the edge of the moment, heart pounding, every muscle screaming to act. He knew that one misstep would not only doom Lily, but paint him as reckless before all who watched. Yet hesitation meant death. The scene was no longer about a memorial or reputation. It was a battle between instinct and arrogance, between a father bound by appearances and a caretaker armed with knowledge. The hall of chandeliers and marble had transformed into a crucible of truth, and as Lily's tiny body quivered in the crook of her father's rigid arm, the line between reverence and survival blurred until nothing else mattered. The tragedy unfolding before those eyes whispered a lesson often ignored in grand halls: dignity is not measured in silence or control, but in the courage to protect the vulnerable, even if it means defying tradition. The silence in the hall thickened until it felt suffocating, broken only by the ragged gasps of Lily while as her body convulsed in Noah Whitfield's rigid arms. The child's lips paled, her tiny fists clawing desperately at air she could not find. Her fragile frame quaked under the pressure of milk caught in the wrong place, and every heartbeat in the room seemed to stop with hers. Then came Evan's voice, fierce and unwavering, carrying the authority of someone who had walked this line between life and death too many times before. "Let me act now, or she will stop breathing." His words pierced through marble and chandeliers, slicing through pride and decorum. For a split second, Noah hesitated, torn between the image he clung to and the raw terror of losing the only remnant of grace. His hands trembled. He looked at the child's contorted face, and for the first time that evening, doubt cracked his armor. Evan moved swiftly, not waiting for permission that might never come. He reached forward and, with a steadiness honed in sterile hospital rooms, tilted Lily gently to her side. His hands were firm but tender, positioning her tiny head downward just enough to free her airway. Then came the rhythm, the precise motion only a trained caregiver could perform. His palm pressed lightly against her back in measured beats, the cadence of survival. Each pat was a prayer, each second a battle. At first, nothing. The child's body remained taut, her cry trapped inside. The audience collectively held its breath. Then, suddenly, a wet gag, a sputter, and the milk expelled in a rush down the cloth draped across Evan's shoulder. The sharp gasp that followed was not of fear, but of life returning. Lily inhaled shakily, her chest rising, then falling again, then steadying. She whimpered, "I like it," eyes fluttering, before nestling instinctively against Evan's chest as if she had found her harbor once more. The hall froze. The storm of whispers that had once condemned Evan now evaporated into silence so pure it carried the weight of reverence. Guests who had sharpened their words against him now found their eyes stinging. A woman dabbed at her cheeks with a lace handkerchief. A man lowered his head, ashamed at the thoughts he had uttered minutes earlier. Reporters who had come for scandal let their cameras hang loose, lenses fogged with something closer to awe. And then, from the back of the hall, an older relative of Grace, voice trembling with age, spoke aloud what many had not dared to remember. "Grace told me once, she used to carry Lily just like that. She said it helped her little one keep the milk down, helped her breathe." The confession hung in the air like a verdict. Noah's face drained of color. The very act he had condemned as humiliation was, in truth, the quiet wisdom of the woman he had loved and lost. The weight of realization crashed over him. He saw not just Evan's arms around his daughter, but an echo of Grace herself, her intuition, her tenderness, her quiet defiance of convention for the sake of her child's life. In that instant, Noah's rage collapsed into grief, grief into guilt. The chandeliers above seemed dimmer, as though the light itself bent to the truth revealed. Evan said nothing. His only focus was the slow, steady rhythm of Lily's breathing, her head pressed close enough to feel his heartbeat. In his calm, the chaos dissolved. He was not flaunting himself, not seeking recognition. He was simply doing what love, in its purest form, demanded. Around them, the hall no longer looked like a theater of judgment, but like a sanctuary. Strangers sat still, reverent, humbled by the sight of life, restored not by power, not by wealth, but by care. The lesson unfolded without words. It was in the hush that followed, in the way eyes met and then lowered, ashamed at their earlier cruelty. True dignity had not been displayed in marble or chandeliers, nor in rigid rules disguised as strength. It was carried instead in the courage to act, in the humility to admit when another knows better, in the willingness to protect even when pride protests. In that moment, a hall built for grandeur became a witness to a far greater truth. Survival rests not in appearances but in compassion. And sometimes the most radical act of love is the simplest one, knowing how to hold on just long enough for another to breathe again. By morning, the memorial had already transformed into headlines. Photographs filled every front page. Lily nestled peacefully in Evan's sling, her tiny body secure against his chest, her eyes half closed in comfort. The captions were merciless toward Noah Whitfield, the billionaire who silenced compassion. A servant saves where a father faltered. The internet carried the story further, and strangers who had never heard of Grace Whitfield debated fiercely across screens. Was Noah a man of power blinded by pride, or a father drowning in grief who had simply lost his way? The image of Evan with Lily spread like wildfire. People shared it with words of admiration. Love doesn't always wear the face you expect. Her mother lives on through the way she is held. What had begun as whispered disapproval inside the memorial hall became, within hours, a tide of empathy for the maid who acted when others stayed silent. And with every repost, Noah's carefully built reputation of control and perfection cracked further. Inside his mansion, Noah scrolled through article after article, the glow of the screen highlighting the exhaustion in his face. Every headline cut deeper than the last. He had prided himself on being untouchable, a man who could bend reality into order. But now reality bent him. The world had witnessed not only his fury, but his failure to protect the one piece of grace that remained. The man who had ruled over boardrooms now found himself powerless in the court of public conscience. That evening, Noah walked alone to Grace's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the city's noise a distant hum. The marble headstone gleamed under a thin veil of moonlight, etched with words he had chosen but never fully read. Beloved wife, cherished mother. He sank to his knees, not as a billionaire, not as a man of power, but as someone stripped bare of illusions. For the first time, he admitted silently what his pride had denied. He had failed to honor Grace, not by the chaos of a memorial, but by rejecting the very tenderness she once embodied. Evan stood nearby, silent as ever, with Lily tucked into the familiar sling. She stirred lightly, then, as though sensing the presence of the mother she had never known, reached out her small hand. Her fingers brushed against the cool marble, and in that moment, her lips curved into a radiant smile. It was not a fleeting smirk, but a full, unburdened laugh, the first she had ever given since her birth. The sound rang through the graveyard like a fragile bell, pure and startling in its innocence. Noah's composure shattered. His hands clutched the earth as tears flooded down his cheeks. The child's laughter, so simple yet so profound, felt like Grace herself speaking through her daughter. It was a greeting, a reminder, a forgiveness he had not earned but desperately needed. He bowed forward until his forehead touched the grass, weeping not only for what he had lost, but for the blindness that had kept him from seeing what still remained. The moment did not belong to wealth or legacy. It belonged to the truth that had always been within reach, that love often hides in ordinary gestures, in the closeness of skin to skin, in the safety of a sling stitched not from luxury but from care. Evan, quiet and steadfast, had become the vessel through which Grace's memory lived on, not because he sought it, but because he acted without hesitation when it mattered most. Noah realized then that strength was not measured in control but in surrender, in allowing another to hold what he could not. His daughter's laughter at her mother's grave was not only a farewell to sorrow, but also a bridge between past and future. In that soft sound, Noah found both an ending and a beginning. The lesson echoed as he knelt beneath the moonlight. Dignity is not lost when we admit our weakness. It is restored when we recognize love in forms we once dismissed. And sometimes the truest legacy of those we lose is carried not in grand ceremonies, but in the smallest acts that keep their spirit alive in the next heartbeat. The days that followed the memorial were unlike any Noah Whitfield had ever known. The man who once commanded boardrooms and shaped markets now found himself the subject of endless scrutiny. But within the storm of criticism, something deeper stirred inside him. The image of his daughter's fragile body trembling in his arms, replayed again and again, colliding with the vision of her soft smile at Grace's grave. It left him humbled, stripped of defenses. Noah returned to the mansion not with the arrogance of a man untouched, but with the gravity of one who had been broken open. Evan was there, as always, his steps quiet, his eyes carrying no triumph, only steady resolve. Lily rested peacefully in the sling across his chest, her breath even, her face serene. The sight pierced Noah in ways applause or condemnation never could. In the grand hall, Noah stood before the staff, before Evan, before the very people who had witnessed his rage. His voice, once a weapon, carried something else, now raw contrition. "I wronged you, Evan," he said, every syllable heavier than the chandeliers above. "What I called humiliation was the only thing keeping my daughter safe. It was not shameful, it was love. And you carried the bond to grace that I was too blind to see." His eyes lowered, his tone breaking. "You are not a servant in this house. You are family." The words settled over the room like balm on an open wound. Evan did not seek applause, nor did he revel in vindication. He simply tightened the sling, kissed the crown of Lily's head, and let silence carry the truth. His actions had never been about recognition. They had always been about survival, about love that transcended duty. But Noah's admission transformed his role. He was no longer just the maid who acted when others froze. He had become the bridge between Grace's memory and Lily's future. Weeks turned into months, and Lily's health blossomed. With every feeding, Evan followed the same rhythm, tilting, patting, swaying in the sling. Her reflux eased, her sleep lengthened, her laughter grew brighter. Doctors confirmed what Evan had known all along, that this closeness gave her strength where rigid formality would have failed. Noah watched in quiet awe as his daughter thrived, not in marble halls or disciplined silence, but in the warmth of arms that never faltered. The world outside eventually moved on, but Noah did not forget. At every board meeting, every social event, he carried a reminder that his empire, vast as it was, meant nothing if he could not first protect the life that had been entrusted to him. And so when he looked at Evan now, he did not see a servant or a symbol of scandal. He saw the man who had preserved his daughter's heartbeat, who had kept Grace's spirit alive through simple devotion. The house that once echoed with formality began to change. Rooms that had been curated like exhibits filled instead with laughter and lullabies. For the first time since Grace's passing, the mansion felt like a home. In the quiet of one evening, Noah sat by the fire, Lily asleep in her sling against Evan's chest. He whispered, almost to himself. Perfection was never marble or chandelier, it was always here. His gaze lingered on his daughter's steady breathing, on the man who held her, on the bond he had finally learned to honor. The story of Noah, Evan, and Lily became more than scandal, more than redemption. It became a reminder carried far beyond their walls that love does not conform to ceremony, that survival often depends on humility, and that sometimes the family we need is not the one we expect, but the one who proves in the darkest hour that love can still keep us alive. So now, to you watching and listening, have you ever misjudged an act of love, only to realize later it was the very thing holding life together? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe that compassion can outshine pride, that family can be chosen as much as it is inherited, then join us. Subscribe to Heart Stories, where every tale reminds us that love is the force that rewrites even the hardest stories.